And now we're doing a little bit different of a lecture than what we normally do. Usually we have a historian up here and it's one person talking. So today we're welcomed by, or welcoming 4 different veterans. We have Phil McClure, we have Peter Willaco, Bill Sullivan, and Pat McLaughlin, or Mac. Sometimes when I see him, I forget that your first name is Patrick, not Mac. So these are all veterans of the 1st Battalion, 18th Infantry, 1st Infantry Division. They've all fought in the Vietnam War. They all contributed to the book Swamp Rats. This is the second of its kind. The first book was called Dog-Faced Charlie. And like Dog-Faced Charlie, Swamp Rats recounts what it was like to fight that tough enemy, the loneliness of being so far from home, and the grief of losing fellow comrades. These accounts underscore the often forgotten fact of Vietnam, that the United States asked these soldiers to go to war. They fought valiantly, and many, many good men went and fought on our behalf. So for that, we're eternally grateful, and I will kick it off over to Phil, who will start talking first. Thank you all for being here, and we'll gather at the end for question and answer.
I have to use glasses. My eyes are getting old. Not they get cold too. I live in Arizona now. Winter is still up here. I thought what I'd do is, when they picked this panel, they really didn't tell us what we were going to do. So Pat and I kind of put our heads together, and what's going to result, who knows? But I thought I would just set a scene for you before we get into the other 3. I went to Vietnam twice. I went in 1965 as an advisor to a Vietnamese recon unit. And then the Cav came over, and I went up there, came home, spent a year, and went back and joined Charlie Company of the 1st of the 18th. Is that better? Okay, I'm sorry. I'll break it here before it's over with. There we go. There we go. Okay. I think that as we get to talking, it's kind of interesting. I wrote down a few statistics, and I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with them. But the Vietnam War, about 2.7 million soldiers served there. Of that, about 1.1 million were in actual some version of combat, either direct combat, combat support. Let's see if I can read my notes here. We're losing about 390 Vietnam vets a day. As of the end of 2016, we were down to the last 1/3, and that's what we are, the vets in here today from Vietnam, both the Charlie Company vets and some of the others I see out there. We're down to you're part of the elite 1/3 left, and probably by 2025, we won't have any. Or it'll be kind of like World War II, where you got one here, one there, and they're trying to mummify them to keep them around a little bit longer. In addition to the combat injuries, another one of our victims' problems was, of course, Agent Orange, and we're all suffering from that even today. And as the casualty list grows from the Agent Orange related cancers, it's getting pretty large. So with that in mind, we put our first book together, and if you ever get a chance to read it, it's good to read that before you read the second book, because you'll find that some of the stories they tell are all the same stories, but they're from 2 different people or 3 different people from different places on the battlefield. And the one thing about writing these stories that was so much fun was nobody could lie, because somebody over there was there too. So you had to keep it straight. Most of the stories reflect what we saw at the time, and the same for this book. What we saw at the time, what we felt at the time, and it's pretty direct. There's no coloring because you can't. we have 3 panel members here, and Doc Wallacco will talk about medics. And of course, we all know that in our terms, angels and chemis are medics. And believe us, we all believe that. And we got Sully here, who was a point man. He's going to give you a perspective of what it was like in the front of the column. And Mac down there became a very well-known squad leader, and he ran a platoon. And a lot of his guys are out here today because of him. So you're going to get a different perspective of what it was all about. A couple of things that I stayed out of the way. I was very, there go my notes. I was very fortunate. I was the company commander of this great group, and I'm alive today because of them. That's the best I can say. My article in the book, if you get a chance to read it, it just kind of summarizes what it was all about. And I had submitted 2 articles. One was looking back, and one was called The Luck of the Draw. And the luck of the draw is kind of a pet of mine, because not all the units are basically the same. The combat units were basically the same, but they were different. And it usually went right to the top of the leadership. And finding leaders that really understood what it was all about. We were lucky. We had 2. And Matt can probably talk about it because he served under General Cavazos, the battalion commander of the 1st ATs prior to my getting there, who rose to 4-star. And Colonel Trensrew, who I served under. Both of these gentlemen were combat veterans before they got to Vietnam. General Cavazos was a combat veteran of Korea, and Colonel Trensrew was in Vietnam the same time I was the first tour as an advisor. So we were lucky about that. So the luck of the draw is having somebody who understands what it's all about, what has to be done and how it has to be done. And they both had the same philosophy. And that philosophy was specifically, you do the mission, you take care of soldiers. And in their minds, you could do both equally well, not to the benefit or detriment one to the other. And we lived with that pretty much, and it worked. You'll read the individual stories, and you have to read these individual stories and start putting these pieces together. You get a flavor for the intensity of operations. There was no break. Time off was calculated in hours, not days or weeks. And you usually had one right after another. Statistically, I read where they'd shown the number of days an infantryman spent in World War II and in Vietnam. In World War II, the average infantryman in direct combat spent basically 45 days. In Vietnam, the average infantryman over his tour spent 244 days in direct combat with no break. So you got to ask yourself, how do they keep it together? And they kept it together because they took care of each other and the kind of support they got, mainly from their fellows and from their units, and sometimes at home. Usually home was no more than letters and mail, which was extremely important. We tried not to listen to the news. We didn't get a whole lot of it because it wasn't very good. But we had nothing to, we couldn't control that. So we just kind of ignored it and drove on. We spent most of our time in small unit operations where we were out there by ourselves. And I don't know, I get it. I don't know who was coming up with some of the intelligence that we operated on, but somehow or another they kept sending us out for larger units. And we were very fortunate. Sometimes we found them, which brought about an exciting moment or two. But generally, they weren't there, which nobody complained about. Because when you find out that you sent about 100 guys out looking for 500, I'm not sure how much of a hurry you are to find them. But we chased larger units, we chased small units, but it was constant, out the wire. That's what we called it when you went out the wire. And all we did was come in, clean your weapons, eat, sleep, plan, and go out the wire again the next day. And it was relentless. We learned quickly how intense jungle warfare is fighting. It's a close combat, it's violent, it's sudden, and it can disappear just as quick. You never could relax. And so the important thing was when you came back into wires to be able to stand down as best you could, because tomorrow you were going to go right back out. And it wore on people. One of the reasons our medics, and Doc Wallacco can talk about it, is in addition to the scrapes and bruises and cuts and the illnesses, he was always checking as were the rest of the medics, the mental state of everybody they talked to. Sully's going to talk about point. We try to rotate the points because it's pretty lonesome when you're the first guy in line. And it can change all of a sudden, so that was rotated. Mac is going to discuss job he had trying to supervise a wild bunch. And some of you don't know of very many of them, but one of his wildest ones is right here in the front row, Tommy Mercer. And so he had his work cut out for him. But I heard about Mac. He left about the time I got there. I don't know whether he didn't want to serve under me or I think he wanted to go home. But I heard about him when I got there, and it was nothing but terrific. I think that that's all I'm going to cover. Each one of these areas that I'm talking about in my story is a description of some of the things that happened in each one of those categories. And you have to read that to find out what they are. But they're going to talk to some of the specifics of it. I think that that's all I'm going to talk about. And as I can answer questions about, well, let me put it this way. The guys used to ask me, where have we been? And I tell them I didn't know. And why don't you know? Well, they give me a map sheet about 5 o'clock in the evening for the next morning's operation. And the map sheet was never the place I was at. And I didn't have enough room in my rucksack to keep all the map sheets. So I usually just got rid of them. So I never knew where we were until I got there. And I was on the map sheet that they gave me. But if they ever put us down where we weren't there on that map sheet, I don't know where we would have gone. So it's always a challenge, but I think you'll enjoy these guys. We'll take any questions you can, or you would like to ask us. Relief. Now, I will be honest with you. When I ran with recon, the Vietnamese recon, my counterpart was a Vietnamese captain who had fought in the Indochina War with the French. And I'll tell you right now, that was the best jungle fighter I've ever met in my life. He was so good that when they established the North-South, he stayed in the South. They sent him back in surreptitiously into the North and let him walk out again with intelligence. He survived that. So I learned a lot from him. He was good. A lot of what I brought to Charlie Company, I'd learned from him. Okay, Doc. Doc's my angel.
What the colonel didn't say is he'd also be asked where are we going, and he'd have to say, I don't know, because he did know more often than not. I'm Pete Wallacco. I'm honored to be here and happy to be alive. I've had many experiences in life. By the way, I'm trying to keep it together. So Having been invited, I can up to be part of this panel. Once again, I can thank Mercer for another fine mess that he wanted to get me into. So here I am. On a private note to our group, any complaints about not winning any prizes for our raffle, next year buy more tickets. That'll take care of that. So my story in this book is you make plans and God laughs. And truly that was the case. I was working in an emergency room, Kenner Army Hospital in Virginia. Great job, great life, part-time job, had money, had a car, had a girlfriend, this, that, the other thing. All is well. And then right before Thanksgiving, I get orders to go to Vietnam. Wow. So that was a game changer and a life changer. But I'm here to say it's the best thing that ever happened to me in my life. People in this room, talk about what I did. We all had jobs to do. Medics, infantrymen, pointmen, whoever, whatever. What we embraced as a unit was we did our jobs. And as a medic, I did my job. As a leader, he did his job. As point man, he did his job. It was a cohesive, well-run operation. And we can thank our leaders for that. And at the same time, the leaders are only as good as the men around them. So, some of the work that I was involved with, being a medic, clearly we talk about trying to save the guys that got shot or blown up, or you do whatever you have to do to try to save their lives. Stop the bleeding, get an IV going, get them the hell out of there just as quickly as you can. That was our main objective. And I don't have any of the statistics, but I know that because of the air evac of the Vietnam War, the casualties was much lower than in any other previous war because of the chopper service that we had, so medevacs. We've talked about stories where the choppers went to the wrong place. There's been stories where the chopper didn't land where they were supposed to, but then there were stories where the choppers came in a hot LZ and pulled guys out of there and saved our ass. So that was all part of the medic responsibility. The other component of being a medic and serving with the guys is that you didn't want to get real personal with them because you didn't know when you're going to have to work on them. And that was a conscious effort on my part. So some of the guys in this room who think that I was an asshole back there, that's not true. I just wanted to make sure I was mentally prepared to work on you if that situation arose. That being said, there was always sick call. That was another component of the job where you had to conduct some form of sick call, try to find out what was going on. And frankly, occasionally there was some mental sick call, and you try to talk to a guy and figure out what's going on in his world. There were a multitude of bugs. Smokey can talk about his leeches if you'd like. We can talk about the red ants falling down on top of us and chewing the hell out of the guy. So those responsibilities ultimately fell to the medic, and it was a job. It was a job that I thought I performed fairly well, but every day was a new day there, and you just never knew what was going to happen. I can tell you that one of the things that has never left my mind, never left me, is when I would take radio watch and I'd hear, "Doc, wake up!" Be this guy. He didn't sleep. I don't know how he did it, but he didn't sleep. Because as was mentioned earlier, we'd be out there for hours and days on end, and if you're taking a radio watch at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, and it's pretty easy to doze off. So, but he didn't. He found a way. Leadership. That being said, I don't want to go into too much more depth. Question and answers, I'd be happy to answer your questions. I did not follow my medical career. I did not become a doctor. I became hospital administrator for a while and in commercial real estate business now. But once again, my life became better because of this. Oh, okay. Mercer. Yes, sir. Tommy? I'm going to take the fifth. I like my bourbon too much. Yes, sir. Well, fortunately for me, I rotated back earlier than that. I was short, if you will. You guys remember the word short? I was short before I got there, and I had less than a year to serve. I was drafted. I was drafted into the Army, and then I was sent over there. The big call-up that occurred in 1967-68, I was part of that. So as a result of that, I went to the field thinking. And again, I didn't elaborate because of the stories in the book. I had no plans of being a infantry medic. I was going to be working at the 90th Replacement Station. And God's plans was different, as I said. So as a result of that, but then I was working with these guys in the field, and I rotated back and ended up staying in the rear. And frankly, when I left, I never got to see them again because I was reassigned. I was 5 months. Yes, sir. Yeah. Anything else? Okay. Yeah.
I'm Bill Sullivan, known as Sully to Charlie Company, and I'd like to take you back to a different time and a different place. What you're going to read in the book is just words, but if you could put yourself in my place, in their place, the political system we had at the time, there was a draft going on. I was out of high school and knew that if I didn't go into military and get the service commitment behind me, it's hard to keep a good job. So I didn't know about volunteering for the draft. So I went down to the recruiter to sign up for 3 years. Well, I took the test, and he told me I qualified for ASA. And I asked him what ASA was, which is Army Security Agency. There's only 2 of us in the room, and he looks around, he leans over the desk, he goes, "It's top secret." Wow, that's all I needed to hear. Young teenager, top secret, James Bond, all that good stuff. I said, well, I'll sign up for it. He said, but it's a 4-year commitment. I said, what's another year? I signed a paper. All right, I'm in the Army. Take basic training at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. I go to Fort Ord, California for advanced infantry training. Wait on orders for OCS. Have a speeding ticket, and they told me I'm going to have to get a waiver. I said, I don't want to mess around anymore. I'll go straight to ASA. Went to the Army Security Agency, got a top secret crypto clearance. They tore my orders up. I was supposed to be a nuclear warfare specialist, and the lowest score I ever made in the Army was on code. And they put me in Diddy Bop City. So after about a week of listening to I couldn't stand it anymore. I told them I resigned ASA. They weren't pleased after spending the money on my security clearance. So they said, where would you like to go? You get 3 choices. I said, Vietnam. They said, good choice, because that's where we were going to send you anyway. No matter what you said to us, you were going. So I have orders to go to Vietnam. I'm supposed to go with the 196 Light Infantry Brigade. And you also had orders for 196 and get down to Benoit. We couldn't land in Saigon because it was being boarded that night. So I'm at, I think it was the 90th Replacement Company, getting ready to ship out to my unit. And they said, we need volunteers for the 1st Infantry Division. You, and you're going. So I get on a bus and I am bused over to Zion. I take my 2 weeks of training there, and then I go to the field. While in the field, I started off carrying an M79 grenade launcher, which is called a thump gun. I carried an M16. I carried an M60 for a while. I was a demo man, demolition for them at times, and ended up carrying an M14 and walking point. Everybody knows these statistics for if you walk point, you have a life expectancy of 3.5 seconds, or if you're a machine gunner, you have a life expectancy of 6.5 seconds, or whatever that is. Those are just statistics. Your chances of hitting the lottery are 1 in a million. If you hit, it was your time. If you got hit in an ambush, it was your time, you were gonna go. Personally, I was comfortable walking point. I'd rather walk point than any place in the patrol. I'm from the South. I grew up hunting. I was used to being out in the outdoors. I wanted to know what was going on. I wanted to be able to see and react to it immediately. And I knew the people behind me depended on me to look for booby traps, ambushes, things like that. I was not that comfortable further back into patrol for a simple reason. When something did happen, it was usually on point. It was somewhere up towards the front of the patrol, ambush or whatever it might be. Gunfire starts in the jungle. You can't always see where it's coming from. You can hear it. And if you're the 40th man back in a search and destroy patrol, you can't shoot forward because you've got 40 guys in front of you you're going to hit. All you can do is turn to your flank and try to guard the flank to make sure that you're not being outflanked by the enemy. And it's sort of a helpless feeling. It's also every second that you're in Vietnam, it's nerve-wracking. It's calm, you're talking to people in the NDP, which is Night Defensive Perimeter, and all of a sudden you're getting mortared. You're getting sniper fire, you're getting a full-blown attack. You're on patrol, all of a sudden it opens up. You never know when it's going to happen. You can never be 100% relaxed when you're doing it. I'm proud to say that I walk point, and I know Tom, and there's many others out there. I don't want to start mentioning names, I'll leave it out. But everybody, it's not just the point man. Everybody in that unit served a purpose, and without them we couldn't function right. So we all served together, and it's not just the combat infantrymen, it was the cooks we had in the back, it was the clerk in the back. Without the clerk, you're not going to get orders to go home. I mean, they serve an important purpose. And the medics, if it wasn't for them, you know, a lot of wounds, wounded would be KIA instead of wounded in action. And I appreciate their service and everything. I made use of it while I was there. But a year out of your life, and although they had Armed Forces Radio, and at the time, for the people who've seen Good Morning America, that long spiel, you know, in the morning, good morning Vietnam, your music was controlled. And I was fortunate enough naturally to make it back. And within 10 days, I am in Denver visiting my cousin. And they had a party, and I was introduced to some young ladies and couldn't really understand them. Didn't understand what crash and burn was and a couple other phrases. Didn't understand the music. And I spent 3 days there, and I said, I have to go back to the house. My cousin said, oh, you got to stay. You got to stay. We're going to Red Rocks, which is an amphitheater in Denver. And said, we're going to see Jimi Hendrix and Vanilla Fudge. And I said, well, I really can't stay. I got to get back home, the plane, get back to the house. You know what I was sitting down on the plane thinking? Wonder who the hell Vanilla Fudge is, and Jimi Hendrix. I'd never heard of them, although they were quite popular in the state. You have to understand, this is a year of your life that is controlled. You're in a hostile environment. You're not keeping up with all the fashion change terminology and things like this. Another one of the things, when I got back, my friends came up to me and they're standing around, and all of them asked the same question. How many people did you kill? And that's the first question they all ask. And I told them none. And they go, none? They said, but you were in the infantry. I said, yes. And they said, you didn't kill anybody? I said, no. And they said, well, Bob was an MP. He got 33. And George was a cook. He got 27. And everybody had some war story and a number of people they killed. And no matter what number you give them, it's never enough. You tell them no, and it was sort of sad to me because the smile would come off their face. I thought they were glad to see me, but they were, I think, more interested in war stories and things like that. They even took me to the movie, The Green Berets, and they said, give us a critique of this. I mean, I sat there, I said, well, this is kind of real. No, that's BS. There's nothing like that. And Vietnam did give me something to compare to the movies a couple of times, but one of them is this John Wayne stuff where you pull the pin out with your teeth out of a grenade and throw it. Let me tell you, that doesn't work. One, the pins are bent, and you can't pull it out with all your might. You have to straighten the pin, and then it still takes a lot of force to pull the pin out. But we were getting ready to be picked up out of the jungle, and I was the first one out, and they said, all right, pop smoke so the choppers can see where to land. So I straightened the pin on the smoke grenade, you know, got my weapon in one hand, going to do the John Wayne thing, and pulled on it and spit out half a tooth. I broke my tooth out there in the jungle. And then it still took a lot of effort to get and throw it. And I have been asked to speak to high school groups and tell them about, you know, this isn't the movies, this isn't your war game you're playing. This is quite real. You don't get shot and get up the next day and go, hey, I think I'll play the game again. But I was explaining conditions. I didn't wear socks. I didn't wear underwear. And these guys are going, ew, that's icky and everything. And I'm thinking, I was 1 year older than what you guys are right now, you know, living this. And this is what we did. And you got your clothes, a helicopter would come out, drop off the duffel bags. Some of them have jungle fatigues in there, some of them the jungle shirts, and you grabbed one. There was no modesty. You just changed there. There was no socks to wear. We didn't have laundry. We didn't have facilities to be clean. We could wash up, you know, in a steel pot with your helmet and things like this. But anyway, I'd like for everyone, when you read it, read the book, not just to read the words, but try to think about the individual and the mindset and the environment that we grew up in. As most of you here, just fate that we ended up as Charlie Company swamp rats. And I appreciate all of you. Thank you.
Well, I'm comfortable and I'm old, so I'm just going to sit right here. So, you all know me as Mac, and my name is Patrick McLaughlin. And so let me add a couple of statistics to those that Phil gave at the beginning. And I referenced these in my piece here, in my first piece, which is called The Gauntlet of the 60s, where I tried to sort of step back a little bit from the nitty-gritty, the kind of stuff that Sully just told us about, and sort of took a look at the decade of the 60s, and those of you that are my age, you know that that was a unique, a unique decade for this country. America changed dramatically in the 60s, and I sort of took an overview of that, and myself in it, and Vietnam and how it played, and so I hope you enjoy it. But some of the stats I wanted to point out, as Phil said, there's, about 9.7% of our generation ended up going to Vietnam. And we know that there are 58,267 names on the wall, but that just counts the men and then the 8 women who died in Vietnam, the 8 nurses. Doesn't calculate the deaths for the guys that got home and never really made it back from Vietnam. Damage from PTSD and all the other problems. It just doesn't calculate any of that. 303,704 wounded, 154,000 were hospitalized. These are big numbers, and just to show you how big they are, you've been to the 1st Division Museum, you know that the Big Red One is America's greatest infantry division. I mean, its history is storied from World War I and World War II. And World War II, you're talking about Sicily, North Africa, Sicily, Normandy, D-Day, Saving Private Ryan. That's the 1st Division coming ashore at Omaha Beach. And some of the words actually said are words of 1st Division officers on that beach. And then Vietnam. But listen to this statistic. The Big Red One suffered 20,770 soldiers killed or wounded in action. I'm talking about Vietnam. Nearly the same number as the division experienced in World War II. Think about that. We suffered casualties in Vietnam, nearly the same number the division suffered in World War II. And if you look at the statistics for World War I, World War I is just a little bit higher. I mean, so it's comparable to the world wars, and most people don't appreciate that. Another statistic that I want to tell you about is also sets Vietnam unique, makes it unique from the other wars. 43.8% of Vietnam War dead were 20 years of age or younger. 43.8% of Vietnam War dead were 20 years of age or younger. It's a young man's war. And it was an infantryman's war for the Army and for the Marine Corps. And the vast majority of casualties were 11 Bravos, were grunts, were infantry. And the draft, we had the draft for sure. I was working during the day and taking some classes at night back in Cleveland, where I'm from, and had a 2S deferment, so I was deferred from the draft. And I was dissatisfied with the way things were going. I knew there was a war going on. My father and his brothers and his sister, my Aunt Marty, who was an Army nurse on New Guinea, they all paid their dues, and so it was my turn. So instead of enlisting, because I felt that college was important to me ultimately, I went down to the local draft board to change my status from 2S to 1A. And the ladies, nice ladies down there, tried to talk me out of it. Well, you don't have to go, and you've got a 2S. I said, well, I'm comfortable in my decision, and I'm prepared to do it, but I just wanted to spend the 2 years in rather than 3 or 4 if I had enlisted. So that's what I did, and they put my name at the top of the list and got drafted, so I was a U.S. And, did whatever training they had for us, which really wasn't very much. Again, if you can compare the training they gave to the Infantry 11 Bravo in Vietnam compared to the World War II units that would go over as a unit en masse, they were well trained. If you do Band of Brothers and the 101st, I mean, they trained for well over a year together before they went over to Europe. I mean, they were operating as cohesive units. And after the division went over the first time, the rest of us here, we all went over individually. Went over by ourselves, and we came back by ourselves. There was no unit cohesion, and you fit in, and you did what you had to do. And the new guys were FNGs, And, you know, and they were FNGs for a while until they proved themselves they can stay alive long enough so that we wanted to get to know them. You know, otherwise we'd be disappointed when they got killed. And so, you know, when I got there in early 1967, I walked point. I walked point as much as anybody in the company, and cut my teeth on point. And so by April 1st, I was a PFC squad leader, and that you know, was my core position for the time that I was there, and was proud to be a squad leader. And many guys that were in my squad with me, fought with me, served with me, are here in this room. And you know, we've certainly a band of brothers, no question about it. And it was an important job, you know, an infantry squad leader, and I guess that's a little bit different too than the other wars. Vietnam was a small unit war, and it was the squad leaders that took out the 12-man ambush patrols. And it was the enlisted guys, the grunts, the PFCs and the Spec 4s that did the LPs and the OPs. And it was the grunts that walked the point. And you know, the point man, the most dangerous job in Vietnam, bar none. And all the stats show that, because the way we fought the war, at least in our area, was jungle terrain. And when you went through the jungle, you went in single file column, except for when, for example, we were at Loch Ninh and we were fighting in the rubber trees, and we went out in an inverted V formation because, again, we didn't have the thick jungle foliage and the bamboo. We were in a rubber plantation. So, but almost all the rest of the time, it was single file. And the point man is the first guy going through, you know, with his machete and cutting through and whatever, and so he's the first man to get cut down. And so these were dangerous times. And if you look at, you know, this group here, Dogface Charlie, most of us served there in 60, 67, 68, some into 69. Larry Van Kuren was 60, 66. But General Cavazos, who's then Lieutenant Colonel Dick Cavazos, was the battalion commander from March of 67 to December, and then Colonel Tranchu came in, and he was in from December to into 68, and I don't know exactly, Phil, when he left the battalion, but he kept the battalion call sign at Dogface. Colonel Cavazos, when he was there, we were Dogface Battalion, then Tranchu kept it Dogface. So for two battalion commanders kept that Dogface call sign, and that's what we're known as, the Dogface Battalion, as well as the Swamp Rats, which, you know, you can read about in the book, and in Dogface Charlie, our first book, and you really should read them both, because it puts the pieces together. It's like a big puzzle, and it puts the pieces together. And but getting back to the war, I mean, it was a small unit war, and yeah, we had our big battles, and certainly we write about them in here. But more than that, I think the stories you read in these books are sort of the personal vignettes that you can't read about, written by the officers who are back in the rear leading the operations from afar. I mean, this is the grunt-side view of war at the basic level. And I think that's what you see in terms of us coming together, Dogface Charlie coming together all these years later. We remember those days, the camaraderie, caring for one another, fighting for one another. And we're fortunate because the 1st Division Museum, and particularly Paul Herbert, the executive director, who saw something in us and basically told a few of us and Tom Mercer that, look, if you guys write a book, we'll edit and publish it. And they did, and that's Dogface Charlie. And it's done so well that they basically gave us a unique opportunity to write a second book, and that's Swamp Rats. And I think what you see here is a lot of guys who didn't write for Dogface Charlie have written for this. And you know, you can read the stories. They're there for you, and they're only some of the stories. But the other important thing about this, from my perspective, is this: that so much of what you read about Vietnam, and if you look at the division volumes, volume 1 and 2 of the history of the 1st Division in Vietnam, and you look at the 1st Battalion, 18th Infantry, there's so many inaccuracies there. They just didn't do a very good job. I read it over recently in thinking about, this panel, and it dawned on me that it's because of guys like us that even though we're writing 50 years after the fact, and it's been that long since we were there, and so Dogface Charlie was published in 2012, and so it had been over 40 years since we had served in Vietnam. So we're writing long after the fact, but what we're writing about really does correct the mishistory that you see. And if you read the description on the 1st to the 18th, I have no idea who wrote that. But in the biggest fight that we were in, and certainly the biggest fight that the 1st Division had probably in Vietnam was Loc Ninh of 67 with all the battalions involved in that great fight before Tet, as a lead up to Tet of 68. They got that wrong. I mean, they indicated that the 1st to the 18th was operating in an area that actually is associated with the Battle of An Thong, where the Black Lions, the 2nd of 28, got hit very, very hard 12 days before we began our fight at Loc Ninh. And that's when Colonel Allen, the battalion commander, was killed, along with about 60 other men and another 75 wounded. And Colonel Allen's father, Major General Allen, was the commander of the 1st Division in the Second World War. And so how they could make a mistake like that is beyond me. But in any event, and so the other thing I noticed is that they had a roster of 118 war dead in that book. It's sort of the official 1st Division history, and it was 182 names on it. And so, but our book, we've got an appendix, and we list 191. So again, we've helped to update the record and I don't even know that we have everybody, because these records were not really kept, and what we have, we've researched. And Larry Van Kuren, and through the 18th Infantry Association, Larry probably knows as much about any of us in terms of finding these names. But again, we have more. So the value is we're correcting the record, we're recognizing everybody that needs to be recognized, and we're telling the stories from the point of view of the guys that were there. So it's direct evidence, it's where the rubber hit the road. And I know that for me, as a man, I know that my service in Vietnam as a squad leader, and the role that I played there has been fundamental to my life and my career. Left the Army after 2 years, went to college, went to law school, had a great career as a lawyer, and I bring so much of it back to my days as a squad leader, working with a bunch of guys who were just great Americans. They were fine warriors, and the country didn't give them anything when they got back. Really ignored them, and it was a shame. It's a sad time in America, how the country treated the guys coming back from Nam. The country failed to separate the war from the warrior, and it took a long time. And really, I mean, if you think about it, those of us that are here and we experienced that, it was over 20 years, 25 years before the country started to sort of recognize us for, the service we performed on behalf of America. I mean, we didn't ask to go over there. We went where the country sent us. And but my parents, passed away when when there was a time in America where they knew that my service in Vietnam was not respected. And I think that's true for a lot of us here, so that you have loved ones who didn't live long enough to see America finally come to its senses and appreciate the service that we provided on behalf of the country. So thankfully America's got there, and the last thing I'm going to say is that it's the Vietnam veterans who were the first to stand in line when the guys went to Iraq in Afghanistan. We were the first ones at the airports, the first ones to be there to welcome them home, to make sure that America did not do to them what America had done to us. So that's, in a brief few minutes, that's sort of my story.
Galen, you want to open it up for a bit?
Yeah, so we're going to open it up to question and answer. I will ask that Laura and I are walking around with microphones, so if you can raise your hand, we'll hand you a microphone, and that's so that this can be recorded at home for our viewers at home. So this will be put on YouTube after the fact.
I would suggest, though, that we give an opportunity to non-members of Charlie Company to ask the questions first.
By the way, is everybody still awake? If not, stand up, make sure. One of my job, making sure we're taking care of business.
All right, we have our first question back here.
I don't really have a question, gentlemen, but what y'all said is true, and what y'all didn't say, that General Westmoreland, because of the 1st and 18th, we was a hotshot unit. Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie, General Westmoreland sent us to places that was hot. And that really stuck us together with each other. Because Bravo and Alpha got hit pretty hard, but Charlie Company, we stayed together. And it worked out because we believed in each other. And that's what made it better for us, because at times when we was hot shot, Westmoreland would drop us off in the places that was hot. And we had to fight for it. But the 1st and 18th was one of the hottest battalions in Vietnam.
So you touched about this a little bit at the very, very end, but I was wondering, what were some of the lessons that you learned from your service in Vietnam that you were able to apply to your lives after Vietnam, like today?
Whoa, where'd you come from? No.
Sorry.
That's right. I'll answer from my perspective. Was one, I think I've always been prepared for whatever happened to me from that point forward, because I always spent the night before getting ready. And the second part of that equation is how to process information quickly and reach a decision and execute it. And that's applicable to the civilian world as it is to the military.
I'll add to that. I would measure a man or a woman by who I would want to have in my foxhole next to me. So the lesson learned was that this group of people were people that I learned to work with, and as life went on, I would always look at my contemporaries and say, is that somebody that I want to be associated with?
Dedication and perseverance. That helped me get through Vietnam. It's served me well in life. Sometimes people call it stubbornness, and it might be, but those are some of the things that I think I learned there. Working under pressure, under physical stress, that also served me well later on. But something else was the leadership that I had there. It showed me the kind of person, the kind of leader I want to be when I was advancing my career, and I got the chance in middle management to have people under me and try to be the type of leader that I served under in Vietnam.
I agree with all that, and I would add to it the ability to adapt and improvise. I think that clearly I learned that in Vietnam, whether it's on point or running a squad or at times running a platoon. And in translating that to, in a sense, my afterlife, as I guess would be one way to look at it, I became an active trial lawyer, and I think used a lot of what I learned in Vietnam about adapting and improvising and trying cases, both criminal and civil cases, and probably doing things in the courtroom that were non-traditional, at least in terms of what you're supposed to do as a trial lawyer, you know, the things you're not supposed to do on cross-examination and what have you. I pretty much ignored those rules, and I did so pretty much because of what I think I learned about myself and the situation because of my service in Vietnam.
Back then, we had a colonel. And it's fact, because he after so many days, to keep our morale high. God bless Colonel. He knew what to do as a leader.
Sure. So there's a question here about the availability of the book. So you got the book is for sale here. It will be also online later on. Dave over there in the corner, he manages the gift shop. He has his card there. So if you would like to order the book by phone or by email after the fact, we'd welcome you to do so, and you can grab his contact information before leaving today. Of course, at any point, if you lose that card, please reach out to any of us at the First Division Museum. This is your story. We want to make sure it's available to you. At any time, reach out either to me or anyone at the museum. Yes?
All right, I have one question over here.
This is for the medic. How much medical gear did you carry, and how often did you get resupplied with medical gear?
I felt like I was a pack horse on many occasions. I carried 2 ammo cans full of various medications, bandages, and whatever. I typically carried 4 canteens, so I always had enough water to make sure the guys that needed water got their water. Resupply was not a problem. Joe Boland's in here, Foxy's in here. They got the gear out to the units as we needed it. So I never felt compromised, if you will, for that requirement. I had plenty of gear.
All right, I have another question over here.
Yeah, thanks. I was a grunt in the AmeriCal Division 68, 69, and I'd like to unpack the casualty issues a little bit. You said 41,000 KIA and wounded in action, which was the same as, did you know, in the 1st Division, did I hear that right?
No, it was just under 21,000.
Oh, okay. Well, I lost pretty much of my hearing. But the point is that in World War II, it would have been a much higher percentage of KIAs because medevac and everything was vastly less good. And also in terms of the single most dangerous job. I became involved with F-105 pilots, and of the 300 or 400 aircraft that were sent to Vietnam, about half of them were shot down, and most of those pilots who were shot down were KIAs. That would have been a casualty rate of about 50%, mostly dead. There weren't that many of them. There were like 300 or 400 of them, but far and away, that was the highest casualty MOS in the U.S. military in the Vietnam Theater of Operations. Although in the aggregate, wouldn't have been that large a number killed. But that was, the Air Force actually took those planes out of service because they were losing too many pilots.
You were talking about how you went there individually and came back individually and didn't have a unit like they did in World War II, that they went together, came back together. How did you stay in touch with each other after you got back? And I can see there's a lot of connections here even after 50 years.
I think that when we all came home, everybody went different directions. I stayed in the service for 26 plus. A lot of them went back to school and became an attorney. Sully was I mean, everything you can think of. And we have a couple of people in here that got together by accident more than anything and started talking about Tom Mercer and Doug Goddard and who else? Kenny Garcelis, which is he's passed. Got together and started talking about it, and it was started when Tommy visited the moving wall And they just started going on the internet, word of mouth, and it's amazing. I'd say we've contacted probably 60 or 80 members of the unit. And that doesn't include those who were contacted but chose not to come back and join us for whatever reason. And we never pushed that because that's an individual thing. So we've done quite well with that, and we're on our 10th reunion, and I'd say we're as close as we are. Huh? Oh, this is 11. I missed the first one. They forgot about me. I think it was intentional.
Phil, did you mention Joe Boland? He was also a guy.
That's correct. Joe was part of that group.
And for a different perspective, I was contacted on Facebook. So up pops my name on Facebook and says, well, were you the Pete Wallacco that served with Charlie Company, 1st of the 18th? And I said, oh my God, I hadn't heard from anybody in nearly 50 years. I said, sure, that was me.
40 years.
40, yeah, this was 40 plus years for me. Then the next thing I see on Facebook is a picture of me sitting on an ammo can, or I'm sorry, on a gas can, and there a box of ammo in front of me eating C rations, and we're out on Highway 13, and Joe must have snapped a picture of me. I didn't know that picture existed. So following that, and that was the year that the book was being published, so I missed the first book, even though there were many stories in there, and I take great pride in sharing that book with my friends and family and whoever. So, and here's a little commercial. The museum, and it's a fairly new feature, so I don't know if anybody's been through the Vietnam section. I was selected and honored to be part of the soldier story, and they have 6 members of the 1st Division, not just Charlie Company, but of the division in various capacities, and we were interviewed, and the story is up there, so it's very informative for you that are not familiar with it. I'm one of them, but I played my part, but there are others. There's a artillery officer, there was a grunt, there was a helicopter pilot, the infantry leader, etc. So it's well worth it, and it would give you further insight.
One of the problems we faced was the attitude towards the Vietnam returnees at the time. And so a lot of the people, many in here, just didn't broadcast anything. Otherwise, you were in a fist fight down in the corner. But so it took a long time to collect it up. And this is probably one of the reasons why there's very few of these. There's a number of them that I'm aware of, but not very many in the scope of things. I'm not qualified to do that, but say that, but I can tell you that the reunion, and in at least one case I'm very familiar with, it was mentioned earlier, where the reunion corrected a misconception, and it was my radio operator thought he had screwed up, and a guy died. And he came to reunion, and when in talking with him, realized that he had no idea that he had nothing to do with that. And so that started his process back. So it can be almost anything that does that. I think that it's probably everybody in here probably has a little touch of PTSD. And I'll tell you, having the sit down and talking about it, because nobody's trying to impress anybody. We don't have to. And you can't fudge on the story. They'll crucify you. But it helps understanding, and actually remembering does in many cases. A lot of times we express our remembrance in the form of humor, and that's the way we do it, handle it.
I can tell you that after I attended the first reunion, the first book, the word that I used, it was a cathartic experience, because it went wow. I went wow. So, to the point of the reunions, they've been great. The book, everything, but it really has helped us with the PTSD.
Well, one of the things I wanted to mention is I'm not on Facebook. Apparently, I'm one of 8 people in the United States that's not on Facebook, but I'm not. So, and I don't Twitter or Snapchat or Instagram or whatever it else is out there. So when the people started getting together, it was more difficult to find me, but they did. And I get a call one night from Doug Goddard, who asked to speak to me. I get on the phone. And he starts talking, said, "This is Doug Goddard." Okay. I don't know who you are. And he kept talking. He said, "I served with you in the military." Well, I served with a lot of people. He said, "I was your lieutenant in Vietnam." Then it started to come back to me. This is 42 years after the fact. And names, places, everything start to either shut down or they fade. And as Doug's talking to me, I'm still not quite getting it, but it's starting to come to me. He said, "You were in Charlie Company, Mike Platoon, you good soldier, he said, "You carried M14, you were a point man and a good soldier." And I said, "Well, you had me right up to the good soldier part. I'm not sure about that." But then Doug explained to me that the unit had gotten together and just had a reunion, and I've made everyone since then. I'm still not on Facebook or any of that, but we keep together. We have our email addresses and phone numbers, and we have our reunion. And, we have Alan, who's taking care of our email for the company, and everything is appreciated. We have a lot of support here for the reunion, and just couldn't do it without a lot of these individuals, and appreciate all of it. But anyway, that's how I got involved. And the other thing is that some of the stories we tell, we see it from a different perspective. Some people remember a battle name, some people remember a date, some remember all of it. And I just tell people, I was sort of at the bottom of the chain of command, and all I knew was it was light, it was dark, it was dry, it was wet. I was in the jungle, I was in the mountains, or I was in elephant grass. I was on ambush or patrol. I just didn't know where. And where was not important. Surviving that was. And we remember the battles and have our different perspective on it. But anyway, I'm just proud to be a part of it today.
Phil, I just got a quick comment on
Yeah, go
this.
ahead.
I think by and large, Vietnam combat veterans have not been joiners. I mean, obviously there are exceptions, but I don't think we looked to join veterans organizations when we got back from Vietnam. And then, maybe after some years, we began to do that. But I think that helps to explain the fact that we lost touch with one another, aside from the fact that, as I mentioned earlier, we came back by ourselves. I mean, look, when you come back with a unit, again, there's that connection all the way back to the States and what have you. But the fact is, when we left as an individual and came back home, all the guys you served with were still there. And so, I mean, it's just, they're two worlds. And so we're together here really because of one man, and of course Joyce, his wife, who recognized that maybe Tommy ought to reach out to try to find some of the guys he served with in Vietnam. But Tom Mercer was the guy who really got us together at the first reunion in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, and that's what started it. And it just took that one that Mercer was a mainstay for. And got it together, and then so we've continued it. So this is number 11, and it had to start somewhere. And so Tommy, stand up. So these other folks, stand up now. There you go. This good-looking guy right here. So he's the one, and so we're going strong.
One thing I would say to you that if you get the first book and then read it in conjunction with the second book, I think you'll get a completely different perspective of what went on over there, vice what you've seen on television, read in the papers, or in expos, or whatever you want to call it, or Ken Burns' program. It's a completely different view. But The difference is you know exactly who's giving you the information was the one that was there. It's not a summary from somebody else or a story they heard downtown at the bar or the restaurant or wherever. And it's nothing that's been embellished. Quite a bit of different, it's just a stark change.
All right, with that, we're going to wrap up today's program. We are so thankful for all of the Dogface Charlie veterans for coming out today. We'll host you at a reunion whenever you want to come back. And we're so thankful for you writing your stories down. I know that that's not always easy for everyone. So we're thankful for the 2 books.
If we come back, will you give us some warm weather?
Yes. We'll work on that. It's Chicago after all, but I'll work on it. All right, and I want to announce next month's program is on Thursday, May 23rd. And actually, it's not next month. That's this month. And it will be Chicago at War. It's a World War II story about Chicago on the home front. The 2 producers, the author and writer of the program, and then the producer of the program will be joining us for that event. Also, if you're a local to Chicago and you're a veteran, there is a representative here from Honor Flight Chicago, and there are applications to take a flight from Chicago to Washington, D.C. to see the monuments. We thank you all for your attendance, and we look forward to seeing you next month. Thank you.